Welcome to chapter 11 of the book of 2 Samuel. It begins, "And it came to pass in the turning of the year into the time of the Exodius," that should be highlighted in green. You can add that to your English derivatives book. An Exodus, Exodius, the departure of the kings I have for battle added because this is what it's talking about. That David sent Joab, his commander-in-chief, and his servants with him, and all Israel, the military. And they utterly destroyed the sons of Ammon, and that was the people in the same area that was in the last chapter where it left off. And here the war continues against the Ammonites, and they besieged against Rabbah, a city in Ammon. But David stayed in Jerusalem. So everything was going good for David. He was getting money, tribute from the nations around who he had conquered. He was conquering more peoples. The military was succeeding. He didn't go to battle himself. He stayed in Jerusalem and led a good life as a king. And it came to pass towards evening, Esperon, we have the Vesper service, comes from that in the liturgy. And David rose up from his bed and walked. Now, in the evening, towards evening, so laying in the bed doesn't mean he was sleeping like at night. He was just laying in the bed, relaxing, and he walked peripati, and we have peripatetic, people that are walkers are called that. He walked upon the domatos of the house of the king. Dome of a dome on top of a building. It comes from this word, domatos, a roof. And in those days, roofs were flat, and they were able to use them as a sort of a patio rather than down on the ground. Took advantage of the narrow spaces of the houses together. So he was on the top of his. Now, his building, his house was in the Acra. That means it was in the height of Jerusalem above everything else. So he could look down and see what was going on. And he beheld from the roof a woman bathing. Well, a lot of men, if they saw a woman bathing, would look. Some men would not want to do that, knowing that, well, this is, I shouldn't be doing that. But David chose the lesser of the two things. He looked and lusted. The woman was good to the appearance exceedingly. And men lusting after women is bad, and of course, but yet it's worse with David in a way because he was married. He had a bunch of wives, and they concubines and many children, so he could have relations with any of his wives, and this is what he should have been satisfied with. And the problem with sin is we shouldn't be doing something, and we should be satisfied not doing the sin, but the sin takes hold and we become vulnerable and we break the laws of God. And this is what David did. The woman was good to appearance exceedingly, and David sent and sought the woman. Okay? And they said, "Is this not Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite?" They told him she's a married woman, a wife. Now, this puts it in a different position for David. If he decides to go further with this, then he would be committing adultery. And in those days, it was a death sentence for someone to commit adultery. Today, when I was a young man, you could go to jail, prison for committing adultery, but they changed everything later and made it so it's not illegal. Anybody can commit adultery, and they're not going to suffer the consequences from the civil government. But with God, it's a different story, as we find out. So David knows that she's married. So the sin was he was lusting. He didn't have to call the woman. And same with us. If we are, at the beginning of something that we know we shouldn't be doing, the best thing is to walk away. If not, we continue with the next step, then something it can turn out really bad. And so he calls her, and David sent messengers and took her. So he calls, and she comes, and he entered to her and went to bed with her. So now there's the second thing, is the committing adultery. But it's even worse. She was being set apart for her uncleanness. She was in her monthly period. And to God, this was another almost a death sentence if you went to bed with a woman during her period. And so David has now done the third sin against God. To us today, to go to bed with a woman with her having a period, I'm sure many men do, and it's not against the law, of course, but it was against God's law. David knew it. And then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived. So David's thinking, oh, well, this is good. I've got away with this whole thing. Had sex with this woman, and, well, didn't happen that way. The woman conceived, and she sent and reported to David and said, I'm one conceiving. I'm having a child. Oh, no. David's now in a rough spot because of if he cares for the woman, he doesn't want her to die. He wants to cover the whole thing up, and he doesn't want to be found out that he is the one that was caused of this pregnancy. So David decides to send to Joab, the general, saying, send to me Uriah the Hittite. And Uriah was not a Jew. He was a Hittite from probably from north of Syria, which is today Armenia. And Joab sent Uriah to David, the husband of Bathsheba. And Uriah came and entered to him, and David asked for the peace of Joab. How's everything going with Joab, the general? And how about all the soldiers, and how's the war going along? The peace of the war. Well, that's an oxymoron. Peace of war. And these are just figures of speech of the way idioms that they used in those days. And David said to Uriah, go down to your house and to wash your feet. Go clean yourself up. He comes in there as a soldier, all dirty probably, and coming from a long way. And so David said, go clean yourself up, and thinking that, well, if he goes there, he'll have relations with his wife. And Uriah went forth from out of the house of the king. And there went forth after him a tribute from the king sending money and everything to him to enjoy the night with his wife. But Uriah went to bed by the door of the house of the king with all the bondmen of his master, all the soldiers, and he did not go down to his house. So here it is. The best laid plans of mice and men oft go astray, and something like that in a poet, a Scottish poet. Not Burns. Was it Burns? Anyway, Robert Burns. And they reported to David, saying that Uriah did not go down to his house. And David said to Uriah, are you not come from out of a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said, you should go down there. Uriah said to David, well, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in tents, and my master Joab and the bondmen, soldiers of my master, camp upon the face of the field. And shall I enter into my house to eat and to drink and to go to bed with my wife? When should I be doing this? By your life and by the life of your soul. In no way shall I do this thing. No, I'm not going to do this thing. He was righteous. David was very unrighteous here, but yet Uriah was very righteous. God is showing us the two contradicting things going on here. All the things that David's doing wrong, but Uriah's doing right. But now, does David just confess and say, well, I this and that, and suffer the consequences? No, he's going to continue to try to cover it up. And David said to Uriah, well, stay here also today and tomorrow, and I'll send you. And Uriah stayed in Jerusalem on that day and the next day and didn't go home. And so David called him, and he ate before him and drank, and he intoxicated him. So David's got another plan. Well, I'm going to get him drunk and go home, have sex with his wife, and that will be the end of it. And he went forth that evening to go to bed upon his bed with the bondman of his master, but he did not go down unto his house. David has now failed 3 times. It hasn't worked out. So he's got to come up with something else when it gets worse. And it became morning. And David wrote a scroll to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And basically, it was his death sentence. And this is the next thing that David did. God wouldn't condone anything like this. God didn't even allow a lamb that was sacrificed to be boiled in the milk of its mother. God cared about things that are right that you should or you shouldn't do. But to send a righteous man his death sentence is a terrible thing to do, and I look at that as the next thing to do. And so then next thing he says, and he wrote in the scroll saying, well, bring Uriah right opposite the battle of the fortified part, and turn away from behind him, so that he shall be struck and shall die. So now he's planning on his murder. And it came to pass, and Joab's guarding at the gate, so Uriah goes back, and that he put Uriah into the place where he knew that men of power were there, the strongest area, the strongest men. And the men of the city came forth and waged war against Joab. And there fell some of the people from out of the bondmen of David. And even Uriah the Hittite died also. So now it's murder. And Joab sent and reported to David all the matters of the battle. Now Joab knows what David was doing was wrong, because as far as he was concerned, Uriah was a righteous man, warrior. But he's following with David for whatever reason. And Joab gave charge to the messenger, saying, well, in your completing all the matters of the battle, speaking to the king, that it shall be, if the rage of the king ascends, and he should say to you, and this is what Joab is saying, what David would say, why is it that you approached the city to wage war? Did you not know that they would shoot from the top of the wall? Who struck Abimelech, son of Eroval? Did not a woman toss a piece of millstone upon him from above the wall, and he died in Thaviz? Why did you lead forward to the wall? And you shall say, and also your bondman Uriah the Hittite is dead. And the messenger came to Joab, to the king in Jerusalem, and reported to David all as much as Joab spoke. And the messenger said to David that the men strengthened against us and came forth against us into the field, and we came unto them unto the door of the gate. And the ones shooting shot unto your bondmen from the wall, and there died some from the bondmen of the king, and even your bondman Uriah the Hittite has died. So now David hears what he wanted to hear. He's all got himself covered. Uriah is dead, and Bathsheba is a widow, and only maybe, I don't know if anybody knows that she was pregnant from him or not. Doesn't say. And David said to the messenger, they may have guessed, David said to the messenger, the angelon, angel if it were from God, thus you shall say to Joab, now the next sin, do not let this matter be severe in your eyes, for perhaps indeed it was thus one way, and perhaps thus another way, that the broadsword devours. Well, maybe he would have died anyway, one way or the other. Don't worry about it, because he's placating Joab, because he knows he's guilty, and Joab knows he's guilty. So he tries to cover that up. And then he says, strengthen your battle against the city and raise it, and strengthen against it. And the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, has died, and she lamented over her husband. Now, whether she loved him or not, and doesn't really get into all of that. And the time of mourning went by, however much that was, I'm not sure. And David sent and brought her into his house, and she became to him for a wife. So the only ones that may have known were the messengers that went and brought Bathsheba to David when he had relations with her. So now time is over, so he's bringing her in, and the child will be his. And she bore to him a son. And that would have been the end of the matter for David. Everything's gone well. Everything worked out well. The matter which David did appeared wicked in the eyes of the Lord. We think we're going to get away with something, planning all these things, trying to cover everything up, but God knows. And we're not going to get away with anything. There's going to be a judgment. And we may get away now. We may not face a judge in this life, but we will face the judge eventually. And the things that we think that we are getting away with will be found out. But also things that can happen in our life have consequences, and God takes care of these things. I walked away from God for 13 years. And while I was gone, I can tell you right now, all the bad things and evil things that I did, I suffered for them over the rest of my life in different various ways. Again, they're paid back to me double. And we're not going to get away with these things. And if I did get away, God would not allow it in heaven. So the forgiveness of sins by Christ's suffering and dying on the cross for us to cover up these sins is what we have to relieve our sinful nature, the terrible things we have done. But David didn't have the Christ to set over him. He had instead Nathan the prophet coming to him, and we'll find out what Nathan has to say about this whole situation to David. But to find out what Nathan has to say, you'll have to join us in next video in chapter 12. So until then, God bless.